We're absolutely delighted to have Angela Allen, award-winning script supervisor, with us today. She's a highly respected script supervisor with the industry, regarded as one of the best in her craft. And her career began back in 1946, working on a film called Nightbeat. And she's gone on to work on, I think you mentioned 100 films, Angela?
Yes, 100, I'm told.
I can't list them all. I can list them all, but it would be, an effort. But The Third Man, Moby Dick, The Misfits, The Night of the Iguana, Dirty Dozen, Charge of the Light Brigade, Women in Love, Jesus Christ Superstar, The Man Who Would Be King, Zulu Dawn, Labyrinth, Hamlet, Tea with Mussolini, to name a few. Angela, how did you get into the film industry?
Well, I started in an actors' agency called Film Rights, that then I think became London Films. And somebody took me to Denham Studios one day and took me around the sets, and I thought, I think this is my life. I'm not really secretarial material. And so I then got a job as a secretary to a producer at Denham. Oh. He had a very, very strong Hungarian or Romanian accent, and I really wasn't up to it because he dictated on the run, and my shorthand wasn't that wonderful. But the bug bit me then, I think. Okay, so then, after I was let go, or sacked, whatever you want to say,
let go.
And I went literally hawking. I got a list of all the film companies that were around, and I literally went round knocking on doors saying, have you got a job? Somebody sent me to Isleworth Studios, as they're called then, but it doesn't exist anymore. And I got a job. I met Guy Hamilton, I think, as I entered the studio. And I got a job as assistant continuity, as it was called then. Now it's called script supervisor. And I was put on Nightbeat, and after 2 weeks, they needed second unit down in the docks in London, and I was sent down there. No such luxury as a car to work. You'd have to get the first train in the morning, the tube I lived in Maida Vale, to the docks, go through the docks, climb down a Jacob's ladder to get, to water level.
Oh, and then, God. So and then virtually down in the sort of in sewer land.
And it was one of the coldest winters on record. We also shot at what is now a famous pub, and it's quite smart, called Prospect of Whitby, but then it was a den of iniquity, broken windows, rats, you name it, that was what was there. So it was quite a baptism, I suppose you could say.
Straight in at the deep end.
At the deep end, yes.
So did you consider being an actress before turning to doing script supervision, or?
No, I think as a child, of course, I wanted to be one, but, I couldn't have afforded, I think, to have gone to RADA or one of the things. And originally I thought I wanted to be a makeup artist, but I was told you had to draw, which I'm incapable of, unfortunately.
Really?
Yes. And so I then, heard of somebody doing continuity, and having done shorthand typing, that was how I got into it.
Well, the role of a script supervisor is extremely important to any production. And when you were starting off, that would have been, when you were on The Third Man, for example, it was an era before computers, mobile phones, video playback. It literally would have been, your continuity notes would have been absolutely the most important part for any director. They must have had to have been meticulous, attention to detail. It must have been, how was it working without those sort of added bonuses of video playback to check a shot, or it must have been difficult?
Well, you had to be very observant, and you had to write everything down in your script and then type it all out very accurately. With the notes in those days, you typed every action, all the dialogue, if there were changes of dialogue, at what word somebody stood up and what somebody handed a cup over or which hand. But, you know, it was very good training.
So what was it like working with Orson Welles?
Well, we didn't have much of Orson Welles. My unit, the second unit, shot his very first shot when he approaches the wheel.
Because you were second unit.
I was second unit, yes. And then he walks back again. Then he disappeared out of the country, as usual. And my unit shot the final shot in the film, but with Carol Reed directed everything. He lived on Benzedrine, I think, to keep going day and night. But we shot that final shot in the film, which the office was telling him he had to cover. And he said no.
He wouldn't.
No, absolutely not. And we tried her first at one length. Then he said to Guy Hamilton, who was his first, put a bit further back. And the third take even further back, so she had a longer walk. But he would not cover it, and he was so right.
He was right. And this is 75th anniversary British quad poster of The Third Man. And, I mean, working with Carol Reed, was that... I mean, you must have learnt so much. You were so young. How old were you when you went to work on The Third Man?
19.
19. And that was your third or fourth film?
I think it was my third or fourth, yes. And he did teach me a great deal, because I used to take notes at the rushes, and then they kept me on, and in the cutting rooms, and I'd either take notes or they taught me how to join on cement joiners in those days. And yes, he taught me a great deal. He taught me, you know, how by changing a cut or trimming it or moving a shot, what a difference it made to the scene.
So being in the cutting rooms again, direction and cutting rooms, many directors have come through the cutting rooms. It is one of those places you see the overall film and you get an overall feel, and you learn so much about every single production and every single aspect of the departments that are putting the film together. Yes,
and I do feel that through him, one realised when I went to John Huston, I'd say, well, I don't think that really works. So how about trying to put that shot there or trimming that off, because it doesn't work the way, or what do you think? And so, I learnt a lot. Carol Reed, I suppose I could call him my mentor in many ways.
And interesting you say that you not only... continuity or script supervisor doesn't just stand there making notes. It's the fact that you would contribute and say to the likes of John Huston, with the experience that you were getting and gaining, especially in the cutting room when you did see shots change, you were able to go to a director and say, why don't you try this? Which, it's incredible that you could do that.
Oh yes, and with Huston, I'd be the one who'd know when we needed, or say to him, no, we need an extra shot here. Because John could be quite vague at times, or forgetful, and say to the producers, we shot that scene, and they'd scream at me and say, it's not on the progress report. And I'd say, no, because we haven't shot it. Oh, in his mind, he shot it.
Thought he'd shot it. Well, talking about John Huston, there you are, off you go to Africa, Central Africa, on the African Queen, with two of the top Hollywood stars of the day, Humphrey Bogart and Kate Hepburn. It must have been an incredible experience, but being young, you probably just took the opportunity and off you went.
Well, yes, I did take the opportunity, and he got me sight unseen, because he wasn't in England to interview me. Sam Spiegel, the producer, did that. So
Mr. Spiegel.
Mr. Spiegel, yes. So Huston got me sight unseen, and I remember saying to him, well, I hope I'll be good enough for you. Yes, you will, kid.
Little did he know you would go on to do 14 films with him?
Well, yes, we got on, and I've always thanked Huston, because one day we needed an extra shot of Katie Hepburn in a scene we'd shot, say, a week before. And I said, oh, well, you have to go and change and put the other blouse and hat on. Oh. No, I don't. Well, yes, you do. And I have to say for Huston, because she was quite formidable.
She was feisty, wasn't she?
And Huston said, well, that's Angie's job, so go and change, Katie. Of course, I sweated blood until we got back to England. There were no telephones in those days in the middle of the jungle. And I thank God I was right. But,
Yes.
she was, we got on well, but she was quite tough or formidable, I think I'd describe Katie.
She probably respected the fact that you, although you were young, you were also feisty. She could probably see a young competitor in Angela.
Well, she was quite funny one day when we were back in England. Like, she gave me an order. She said, "You're not to get married."
Oh.
So I said, well, you did. Yes, but it didn't work. So...
That was her advice.
Yes.
Catherine Hepburn style.
Yes.
Not to get married. And on that film, the cinematography was by Jack Cardiff.
Yes, it was.
And was he great fun to work with? Was he very...
Well, he was very nice to work with. I wouldn't say, fun. And he certainly knew his job, and he knew what he was doing, and he always had a very good crew around him. And that was actually the only time he worked with Huston, but then he went on to directing too.
He went on to do other things. I mean, what was the hardest part about The African Queen? Because really, you just had no luxuries. You literally, you were just on a river.
Well, we all lived in the jungle first, in what was then called the Belgian Congo, in a camp literally being hacked out of the bush. And we all, there was a Belgian couple, I think, cooking for us. And I have to say, we all survived. Nobody got sick. Then we moved to Uganda on Lake Albert. And we lived on a boat, the Lugard. We all got sick. And the water, which was bottled water, so-called. And then we had to have a 3-day shutdown because Cardiff, Hepburn, and so many of the crew literally, couldn't stand up. They got terrible dysentery.
How awful.
So it was quite tough. But, when you're young and you do things, I remember we went for a walk on those days, the few of us who were standing. We climbed to the top of the Murchison, and we had the so-called guard with us with a rifle. And somebody said, have you got any bullets with you? No, we didn't have any bullets. So it was utterly... well, we said, we're halfway up, let's carry on. And
right.
We got told off severely by the so-called production manager, you shouldn't have done this. And then I saw, towards the end, when we were nearly finished, because all the animals had retreated when they could hear, I suppose, the boat on the river. And I saw an elephant had suddenly... So I wanted to go up and pat him, and the boys had to restrain me because he's an African elephant.
He's a wild elephant.
You don't do that, but So that was the only elephant I saw the whole time I was on the African
All
Queen.
the animals just left you to it.
Well, the baboons were there. They used to watch us every afternoon, but they just come out and watch. But on the other bank, but no, most of the animals, the bigger ones,
Did
had
you feel
retreated.
safe?
Oh, I never thought about it, I think. I was young, so...
Having just an adventure. And did Lauren Bacall, she wasn't in the film, but she did come out on the location, didn't she?
She was there. Lauren Bacall was there the whole time, or Betty, as we called her, which is her name.
Yeah.
Yes, no, she used to come out normally at lunchtime. She used to say she did the catering. No, she didn't, because it was sort of sandwiches they'd bring out or whatever for us to eat, on the boat.
And was Lauren Bacall there to keep an eye on Bogey, or...?
No, I think, she was young. Betty was then about 26, 27. I think she left the children behind. No, she lived in the cabin with him because there was no luxury in those days. It was just... They had a cabin on the boat like everybody else, although, I had to share a cabin, but naturally
and actually,
together.
as top Hollywood stars, did they take to the sort of the roughing it? Did they take to it well? They weren't prima donna-ish and said, I
Not
want this, I want that?
No, they weren't prima donnas at all. They didn't have anybody with them. They didn't have any secretaries and entourages. No.
Interesting.
Katie was on her own, and Bogey had Betty there, and they were,
Professional.
Yes.
Yeah.
No entourages.
You went on to work with Humphrey Bogart again on Beat the Devil in 1953, where you met one of my heroes, Truman Capote. I have to ask, what was he like?
Well, I adored Truman in those days. He was, I suppose, he was about 23, something like that. And we'd got Truman Capote because David Selznick, the husband of Jennifer Jones, he was not our producer, recommended him to Huston, who had decided that the script we came with to Italy, Ravello, wasn't working. So have the young man who'd just been doing Stazioni Termini for Selznick. So he used to come in and he was rewriting the script. We had to shoot in continuity order because we actually didn't know where the story was going. So he'd give me the script in the morning and I'd come back in the evening and say, now, this is what we really shot because we'd ad-lib and do all sorts of things.
Make it up.
And so you better read this for tomorrow's script because it might have affected what you've written because we changed what you gave me this morning. So he'd give me the gossip of the day that was going on because he was back at the hotel in Ravello and we were out on the set. So we used to meet, and I always remember he had a lovely Balmain lavender shawl, and I'd say, well, it looked better on me. Well, you're not having it. But he was great fun in those days.
So you shot it in continuity. That's unusual, isn't it? Or is that sort of a safety valve for when you don't have the scripts?
Well, Huston liked to shoot in continuity whenever he could. Maybe it was because he knew he was going to change something. Yeah. But we literally on that film had to shoot because we didn't know where the story was going.
I mean, the importance of a good script. Without the script, you haven't really got a film, have you? So was it quite a common thing that the script was always being rewritten?
With John, yes.
Yeah.
Because he had been a scriptwriter himself originally.
On The Dirty Dozen, was that a difficult film?
Yes.
I've heard that Robert Aldrich insisted on so much coverage.
The Dirty Dozen was one of the most difficult. I think we shot, and in those days, we did it the English way, slating it numerically. Well, we got to over 2,000 on the board, but you have to multiply that by 3 because we always had 3 cameras. Everything, the camera crew hated it because everything was a static shot and we just used to pile the cameras 1, 2, 3 above each other. And I remember we were supposed to have, say, 2 weeks of night work. That turned into 7. It was way over schedule, yes.
Out of control, almost.
Well, no, I mean, Robert Aldrich, he came from the old, I think, Hollywood school of coverage. And, the artists would say, what are we doing tonight? I say, throwing the thing down the hole. Oh, we did that. No, I said, we haven't done 360 degrees on every hole. We dropped the thing into the bomb.
How long were you working on that film? How long was the shoot?
Way over schedule it went, I think.
I can imagine.
3-4 months or more, yes. Okay. That was all done at Elstree.
Was it?
MGM Elstree.
You then went on to Huston's Night of the Iguana, written by Tennessee Williams. Did he have much... When you have a writer such as Tennessee Williams, would they be involved in the screening?
Yes, because he only towards the end, Ray Stark the producer didn't particularly like what we'd shot as the ending, and they called Tennessee down to Mexico, to where we were, up at Puerto Vallarta, to rewrite it, which he did. And I remember I had to type the script out for him with him standing behind my back, and he was saying, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I can't wait to get to the next page," because it was exciting. But unfortunately, I said to him then, I said, "I think it's very exciting, but he won't shoot it." And he didn't. Huston wouldn't redo well, we reshot it, but he wouldn't use the new script. I never know why, and I always regret that I gave my script back at the end, that I didn't, because I had, of course, the copy of the rewrite, but I did say to Tennessee, "Well, why don't forget to take it back with you, because you might want to put it into another version of the play,
I love Tennessee Williams saying to you, "Do you think it's all right?" I mean, that's just unbelievable.
He was a very sweet. He was a very sweet man. Well, I only met him briefly, but and I think in a way probably quite shy.
You've also doubled up in a swimming shot for Ava Gardner on Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, and you've doubled for Katharine Hepburn. What was Ava Gardner like? I know you know Ava. You got to know Ava through our family as well, didn't you? Because Andrew and I do go back a long way with Angela's work with a lot of people, members of my family, including my husband. Was she going out with Frank? When did she start going out with Frank Sinatra?
Well, she was, when we started Pandora, she was, I think, officially or unofficially engaged to Frank Sinatra.
Right.
But when we got to Spain and we had the bullfighter who we'd cast, he was a real bullfighter. He fell madly in love with her. So
who didn't? I mean, she was absolutely stunning.
And she was lovely. I mean, she was very friendly right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And the person who designed her clothes, Bumble Dawson, she lived actually just down the road from me, and I think, so she knew Ava. But, on that film, we all became friendly, and then when Frank arrived in town, and she didn't particularly want to go swimming that night, and I was the youngest member of the crew, so I was told, and she was meant to be swimming in the nude, so I was told, well, here's a sort of strapless costume, get in the water and swim. Well, what am I doing, the crawl or breaststroke or what, or paddling around? So, it was a long shot, but I didn't mind. And the water was warm in Spain, and it was, so one didn't mind.
Was it fun working with Sean Connery and Michael Caine?
Oh, yes, it was. And they got on... they'd probably met before, but it was the first time they did work together. Yes, they became good friends, and it was a collaborative effort. I think we all kind of enjoyed it.
I think actually, looking at some of the credits and actually the cast, I know from working in film that when you're on location, when you're working on a film, you become like a little family because you're all together and you're all working for the same end cause. Did you find that working with the likes of Sean Connery, Michael Caine, people, Deborah Kerr, did you find that you became friends, that you made friends with some of the cast and they stayed friends for life?
You see, in those days you didn't have the entourages which it seems today so many of the, I think more the Hollywood stars have. But yes, people chatted and talked, and I seem to be lucky that most of them were very friendly towards me and very nice. And it was a different way of working, and I think in those days people collaborated more easily, and it was, as you say, your own little world, a family for X number of weeks that you did it.
I remember that was great fun. How do you reflect on working with John Huston for so many years? Was it you must have got to know each other really well, and do you know Angelica quite well, his daughter? You've kept in touch with her?
Well, yes, I was in Africa on the African Queen when we got a dirty piece of brown paper that a little boy brought out saying, your daughter has been born.
Oh,
so
he heard that Angelica was born when you were on Africa.
Oh, yes, he did too. He got a piece of paper. Everybody's saying, well, what does it say? And,
you got a daughter. What are your memories of working on the Misfits, which was released in 1961, again with John Huston? Obviously a difficult film, the location in Nevada, I mean the heat of the desert, and Marilyn obviously at that time was difficult.
Well, I managed to work on the Misfits because Huston's agent had put me into his contract because it was very much a union film and you had to be in the union to work. So I had the work permit. I had a work permit, but you had to be in his contract.
So you were in his contract?
Well, yeah, the agent had done that deliberately because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to have me. I did have to have a double, standing in for me who was, well, it happened to be a man, but who was the son of the union's chief, yes. Really? So, who got more money than I did for doing nothing, but that was all right. So it was kind of exciting. I'd never been to Nevada. Reno it was where we shot. And the very beginning, one met the cast. In fact, Huston and Arthur Miller, the author of the play, insisted I take the rehearsal. They wouldn't sit in with all the actors and make them read the script. And they were all very, nice. Well, they were reading it. The others, were good actors.
I mean, that was the last...
Yes.
Clark Gable's last film.
Yes, he loved cars and he'd changed a tire and come in to his wife saying, I don't feel so good, but they didn't realise. And then he had a major one. But it was, people tried to say it was because of the film and dragging, but of course we didn't. He wasn't personally pulling the Mustang because you couldn't. I mean, they were such wild horses. Yeah. Only the stuntmen, poor men, they got beaten about by the animal. But
poor old stuntmen, always at the back.
No, it was a difficult film, over schedule, and it turned out to be his last film and her last film. Well,
Angela, here, this is, you very kindly consigned this with a couple of other of your original Polaroid cameras. This is one of your very early ones that I believe you bought in New York in the early 60s, when you went off on the Misfits.
Yes, I did buy a camera there. I thought I needed, probably a new one, as my other one was probably breaking down.
And how important was your Polaroid to you?
Well, it was pretty important because, that if you take a Polaroid and somebody's arguing about their tie, if you've got a picture, you can say, well, there we are,
I believe that you were known for always managing to cut off Sean Connery's head in the Polaroid you took of him.
Oh, yes. When I was on The Man Who Would Be King, Sean said, oh, can you take some pictures of me for my son? Oh, yes. I managed to cut his head off. I got the camel's head, and Sean said, well, where are they? I said, well, I've got them, but I've cut your head off. It's the camera. So he takes the camera away from me. He says, not the camera. It's you. You go like this. And he was quite right. I never realised that when I was pressing the button, not the dropping the camera. So he never had shots of with his head in it to give to his child.
I'm sure his child has managed to see him on screen, which made up for it. I just got this down here. You've worked with so many different directors, from Sidney Lumet, Roman Polanski, John Frankenheimer, Franco Zeffirelli, Ken Russell, Dougie Hickox, and Jim Henson. I mean, that's a completely eclectic list of different talents, different personalities. Did you find that they all worked in different ways and you had to adapt how you worked, or did
Oh
you
yes, I feel after all you're in a different capacity. Yes, you've got to adjust to them. No, I mean you still try to do the job as best you can, but you realise with some that they cannot be told anything, so there's no point. You can just discreetly say, well, it didn't match. And they say, I don't care. So there's no point in having an argument about it. They'll either find out in the cutting rooms, and some would take, if you tactfully say, well, why don't you start the scene a little earlier, because that way it gives you more leeway in the cutting room. Others would say, I know where I want to cut. And I said, well, actually, I don't think anybody does, because you might want to trim it up and then you won't be able to. And then they would take suggestions. So you did have to adjust. And I realised after, having worked on many films, you can tell somebody that it doesn't match and they did everything differently. But if the director says, I don't care, continuity is for wimps, there's no point in going on. Just let the subject drop. They'll find out later.
They'll find out in post. So who would you say were the difficult ones? Who were the ones who perhaps had an ego and didn't like? Was it because perhaps they didn't like to be told they were wrong?
No, none of the ones that you've talked about.
Okay.
They were, helpful. And Sidney Lumet was the most disciplined and knew exactly what he wanted. Because he was somebody who came from television, and he had 2 weeks or a week, whatever it was, of rehearsal, where the actors could ask him what their motivation was, what their characters were, and he'd written backstories. But once you start, and he had designed every shot, he'd mark his own script up with his angles. And once you started shooting, it was no good the actor saying, well, I don't think my character would do this. He'd say, you had your chance, in the rehearsal period. That's the way it's going to be. So he always beat his own schedule, whether it was by 1 day, 2 days. Yes, he was the most efficient one I ever worked with, because he knew exactly. And once, I think it was on Murder on the Orient Express, one said, well, don't you think you need a close-up of something or other? No.
He knew what he wanted.
But he admitted in the cutting room, somebody else, I think the editor, said to him, well, it would have been nice to have had a close-up. Yes, he said, on the kind of nobody's perfect, No, he was the most disciplined and organised.
And you've worked with your friend Franco Zeffirelli on many of his films, including Young Toscanini, Hamlet, Jane Eyre, and Tea with Mussolini, and Callous Forever, which was Callous Forever his last film.
Yeah, yes, it was, yes.
And you two became really good friends over the years. What are your memories of working with Franco?
Well, Franco was quite different from all the others. Very mercurial. We'd have terrible rows about shots and things, and he'd say, well, he could be there. I say, well, he can't be there. He's, got a red, or she's got a red costume. We had somebody there in green. Nobody will notice. And with Elizabeth Taylor, who was very good at continuity, he said to her one day, turn to your left. She said, but I turned to my right, didn't I, Ange? I said, yes. Match with him? And, oh, you two bitches, you know. And we used to go on like this. But he was, you know, he could be impossible with some people. And as I said, we'd have rows, but they were always about the film or something else. But he was, to me, a very generous director. He used to invite me to his wonderful homes, and I had lovely holidays in Positano. And
I do remember you saying, I'm off to see Franco. I was quite jealous.
Yes,
Quite jealous.
I know he was incredibly generous, and I went to his operas, and I think his first love, I think, was opera, but he was a very talented man, and I can forgive a lot of things when they've got talent.
Yes, I think people can be. Chris always says you can always be arrogant if you've got talent. Was it fun working on Tea with Mussolini with some of your old friends, Maggie Smith, Judi Dench, Joan Plowright, who I believe you recently been to her? How old was her? 95th birthday. Was that lovely shooting out in Italy with your friends? Was it an easy film because everybody was so professional by then?
Well, it wasn't always easy for them with him because he did change things, and Joan, we all used to have to say, less is more, Franco, in English. No, we're not doing it in Italian. If we were, maybe the words would be different. So they'd all worked with him before. So yes, on stage and everything. And so they knew him pretty well. And Maggie, he loved Maggie for the jokes, and she didn't mind telling him off. So it was
quite a bunch of characters, actually.
Yes,
on that film for him to from both sides. You've got the strong ladies and you've got Franco. It must have been quite.
Well, you see, they could be staying in his house while they were waiting because we were sort of in Rome, and then we'd been up to San Gimignano. They all knew him after all. He was gay, so they didn't care whether he came in and they were dressed or, because after all he started in costumes. So, they never worried about him, no.
The industry has changed quite drastically from when you began back in the 1940s. What was the best advice that you were given back then, and what would be your advice to a young scriptwriter today?
Well, the actual, shall we say, making of a film in a way hasn't changed, except the equipment has. I mean, from when I started, you had, very heavy cameras, and they've got lighter and lighter and smaller over the years. The lighting equipment, of course, has changed, and now we're sort of digital. In a way, there's less discipline today because it doesn't cost that amount of money to print up the film. They just go on and on. And it seems to me that in the old days, people knew what length a film should be, and they did not shoot 3 and 4 hours of film for a film that can only run, 2 hours or under. Today, you hear of films that have come off the floor running 4 hours or more, but it's not going to run that length in the cinema. So in many ways, I think it's wasteful. And although you're not printing film, you are still shooting a lot of things, so you can go over schedule the other way in just shooting more stuff than you need.
Yeah, no, and I think I remember even in the cutting rooms changing to digital, it could just go on and on and on and on and on, and even the directors sometimes had to be told that's it, enough, because you could just continue cutting and cutting and cutting till the cows came home. If you hadn't have gone into continuity, looking back now, is there any other department or anything else you would have loved to have done in the film industry? Would you have liked to have been a director yourself?
Yes, I did. But if I hadn't, I would have gone into editing.
You would.
I enjoyed that, yes. Well, I was lucky with Huston that he used to, keep me on after shooting, which I don't think many directors do today.
So you would work with him in the cutting? You'd be
Yes, I could say things, and because he'd be forgetful, and he'd say to the poor editor, "Now put that shot in," and the editor would say, "But I don't have that shot." "Yes, you've lost it." "No, I haven't lost it. Look at the notes. You can read them all." And then eventually, there was a lovely one. Russ Lloyd would say, "I'll call her up. Let's call her up." And John would say, "Do you remember that shot?" And I could say, "No, you didn't shoot it. And I can tell you the time we even did it." "No, John, you do not. And he hasn't lost it. We never shot it." And then he'd calm down. He'd have to accept. Yes. So, it was quite funny that he'd remember he'd shot something when he hadn't.
Angela, you've always generously shared your knowledge and advice to young up-and-coming filmmakers. And you've always been a great pioneer of women working in the film industry. And I believe you helped change in the UK that title, Continuity Girl, which nowadays is just, you were party to changing that to script supervisor.
Yes, that is true. And the only reason was that in America, script clerks became script supervisors. And we thought, well, at least that's... and it was really over here because the income tax, the Inland Revenue, when they were switching from PA, when we all used to be on what was called Schedule D and trying to put everybody on PAYE, that one had to engage with the Inland Revenue and explain that, no, we were not a secretary and we did not take orders and dictation. And I had to get a group.
Secretarial role.
Yes, you're a clerk. You're ordered to do things. You're not on your own. And so I got sort of 5 other people in Continuity Ladies to tell him, and eventually he called me up and said, "We've turned you down. But having met you, Miss Allen, I don't think you're going to accept it." And I said, "No, I am certainly not going to accept it." So they then sent the papers to the big house in London, which was then, it's now back to being a museum, but etc. In Strand, the big, where the Courtauld is, what you call house, is where the Courtauld Gallery is. The man accidentally admitted, he didn't mean this, they'd lost the file, so I knew I'd won. But he said, "We'll find it." I said, "I'm sure you will." But I knew by accidentally admitting that they had lost the file, they then allowed us to stay on Schedule D and be called. That's the reason we use the word supervisor, because it sounded less menial to the gentleman in charge at the Inland Revenue.
Amazing. I did actually read a fabulous quote someone had written after the many interviews you've given for The Third Man, which read, "Angela never shied away from a chance to prove herself, and as a woman in the film industry, she knew nobody was going to just give her a seat at the table. She simply pulled up a chair for herself." I know I've always benefited from your career advice during time I worked.
I don't know who wrote that art.
I read it. It was. I read it on Sunday. I thought, oh, that sounds.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think the fact that as a woman in the industry, when you first started out, it was very male dominated, wasn't it? I mean, there were certain roles for certain women, not like now where you've got female directors. I mean, it's just changed
I mean, we certainly never had any women on camera, but that was really, I think, because the equipment
Right.
was so heavy. I mean, especially the Technicolor. I don't think, a girl could have lifted those boxes, certainly one person. So that changed. And I think it changed first in America, where women were, being grips or going up the thing. And yes, it was male dominated. There were about 2 or 3 women editors. Costume, you could be in costume, you could be in hair, not so much makeup at the
Makeup
beginning. It was very much male dominated. You could be continuity, or you could be a production secretary, and then, ordinary secretaries. There might be assistants in the cutting room. Women were assistants. No, it was a male-dominated area, but I personally was never, and I'm not now a feminist in the sense, if we could do the job and do it well, then we should be given both equal chance and equal money. But I'm not for this system now that it has to be a woman directing to get any money, say, from the BFI, or it has to be a woman doing this. If she's good at the job and can do it, that's absolutely right and fine, but not on the basis you're a woman.
Well, Angela, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for agreeing to come in and do this with us today. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.